I mean, this book is really about what it is to be a person, but technology is the ideology of our age. I mean, it's both the material reality of our age and the dream of our age, and to me that means it's the idol of our age, and to a great extent unacknowledged source of injustice of our age. So, yeah, the through line is, what would it mean for us to fully own our identity as image bearers, and what stands in the way of that, and why do we fall short of that? Why do we avoid that?
Hi friends, I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear, a podcast about pursuing hope and healing in the midst of personal pain and social division. I am here today with Andy Crouch. Andy is a longtime friend of mine, but also just an advocate. He's been so wonderful in supporting me as a writer over the years, and I'm really grateful. And I think it just speaks to his character that he really looks out for people like me who are trying to make our way into a world of, faith and writing and culture and commentary. So I'm really grateful for him in general, but also particularly for our conversation today. It's hard to introduce him because he's got a long bio, and maybe Andy Crouch is someone you've heard of before. He has for decades been offering wise insight into culture, into what it means to be human, into Christian thought and practice. And he's done that through speaking and teaching and writing, and again, through mentoring and being generous with his time towards people like me. I have had a chance to interview him here on the podcast before. I am always eager to talk to Andy, and I only wish our conversations could be longer, and this time was no exception. However, today we get to talk about Andy's new book, The Life We're Looking For, and I'm really glad you get to be here to hear his thoughts on what it means to be a person and how to live as those who have been created in and for love. You're in for a treat today. So glad you're here. Well, Andy, thank you for being here today. It is always a delight to me to get to talk with you, and I'm really grateful for your time.
Completely the same for me. Thank you, Amy Julia. Really happy to get to talk.
Oh, I know. I've kind of found recently that I feel like my podcast is just a way for me to not go to conferences and meet up with people who I don't see that in real life, but I really like and want to talk to about ideas. So,
and have honestly way better, less interrupted conversations than in any hallway or whatever, right?
That is very true. We are. No one is going to come over and say, "Can I join you?" So I'm glad for that too. Well, I wanted to start because I often get the question of people will say, "So what do you write about?" And they're often asking me that because I write about these different things, and they're like, "How does disability have to do with privilege, have to do with healing, have to do with parenting?" And I suspect the same might be true for you, that people ask well, wait, how do these different books that you've written all line up? And I've given people a little bit of your bio, and perhaps some have heard you talk on this podcast or other podcasts before, but I'd love to ask specifically, you've got a new book out, The Life We're Looking For. How does that connect? How does that emerge out of ideas that you might, I'm guessing, have returned to and explored from different angles? So can you give us a little bit of your backstory as a writer and thinker in terms of how this book came to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do get versions of it and sometimes struggle to answer. I mean, ultimately I write books. I mean, I do everything I can to avoid writing books. So I only write a book when I feel like there's some angle of something that if I don't do the work of figuring out what I think about it and saying it, something might be missing in the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the theme that I think ties all of the books I've written together is the image of God, human beings as the bearers of the image of God, and how that plays itself out, in culture, which was my first book, in our exercise of power. That led me to think a lot about idols, which are, in the biblical frame of mind, false images, inadequate substitute images. which then leads one to think about the other thing the Bible talks about a lot, which is injustice, which is the violation of the image, usually in the service of some idolatry. And that led me inevitably to technology because, which is kind of what this book is about. I mean, this book is really about what it is to be a person. But technology is the ideology of our age. I mean, it's both the material reality of our age and the dream of our age. And to me, that means it's the idol of our age. And to a great extent, unacknowledged source of injustice of our age. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, the through line is, what would it mean for us to fully own our identity as image bearers? And what stands in the way of that? And why do we fall short of that? Why do we avoid that? Because I think we do. So that's sort of what is percolating under the surface pretty much every time I feel like I've got to write a book.
I love that. If I had, heard you say that in those sentences, like before we recorded, I would have only asked questions about what you just said, which hopefully is what I'm about to do in terms of what my notes have led me to. But But I don't actually, in what I've already prepared, I don't have a question about injustice. So I'd actually love to just follow up on what you just said. I wrote this down. That injustice is a violation of the image, and that technology is kind of often there are unacknowledged injustices there. Can you just say a little bit more on both of those points? Because I'm really intrigued just by, that framing of it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple layers. One is at the very material layer. The truth is that so if technology is very roughly, we may come back to this, but much greater power with much less effort than human beings have ever been able to exercise. Mm-hmm. That power comes from somewhere. It comes above all at the dawn of the modern era, the industrial era, from the discovery of fossil fuels and their extraordinary energy density when refined and turned into fuel. And, getting that out of the ground and getting it to the people who want it and pay for it involves a lot of steps that do not pay a lot of attention to the well-being of a lot of image bearers and underwrites a lot of regimes in the world, both autocratic and kleptocratic, that expropriate the wealth, the extraordinary wealth generated if you happen to have this stuff under the ground in your country for the benefit of a few at the expense of many. So there's that layer. And then, of course, we can say, but we are moving on to renewables now. But the renewables require materials, specifically a number of quite rare elements or constituents of the planet that have to be mined. And so, again, the procuring of those materials, even if you're no longer excavating or, drilling for hydrocarbons, you're still drilling for cobalt and, all the basic inputs. And not to mention fertilizer, which is agricultural technology. So all of this stuff it generates disproportionate concentrations of disproportionate profit, and that could be used. Some nations use that for the benefit of everyone. I think the nation of Norway plausibly could be said to truly be redistributing the wealth generated by North Sea oil to their entire population in ways that are not terribly unjust. Let's just stipulate.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But in much of the world, that's not what happens. So that's the material level. Then there's the kind of formal level, or the level of this kind of systems of life that are created here. And in this, I think there's way more toil that goes into producing the technological ease that we experience than we really appreciate. And it's a bit of a punching bag, and I do punch on this bag in the book, but Amazon is astonishing as a consumer. I mean, every decision Amazon makes is meant to satisfy a consumer such that they can occupy a dominant market position. It's not such a great place to be a laborer. Yeah. And the more machines they introduce into their warehouses, the more constrained and difficult and machine-like is the work in those warehouses. So even as they technologize their own distribution chain, that actually makes the jobs, at least in certain respects, worse for people. And there are all these people whose toil we just never see. For, all we do is click a button and, poof, the thing appears. But that's not quite what's actually happening behind the scenes, to say the least. So, and then I think the top layer is, ultimately you only violate another person by concealing their humanity from your attention. I don't think most of us can fully look someone in the truly see another as human and then just routinely violate them. Maybe I underestimate our human depravity, but let's say it's a lot easier if you can avert your gaze. And I think that technology is giving all of us practice in depersonalizing other people. And whether we treat them as something to be outraged about on Twitter or as an object of objectification because of some feature that they have of them or their life that's beautiful and attractive. So whether we're repulsed by them or kind of lured by them, we're not practicing seeing them. And so even when there's no outright exploitation in the chain, the practices of technology don't necessarily help us attend other people. And that's kind of the precondition for the neglect or possibly violation of other people. So that would be perhaps too long an answer.
No, that's great. That's really question. Helpful. And does lead into just this question of personhood, which is where I want to go. But I'm also just thinking about the, this whole idea of the attention economy and the idea that what you attend to is where your love goes, like that. Yep. And so I think there's a real relationship here between attention, injustice, love, personhood, all of those things. There's completely. A line. So can we talk about persons? What is a person? Why do we need to define a person? Like what even, creates that question in our modern era and actually historically as well. Because I think there have been different historical problems with the idea of personhood that we've overcome some of and created new problems in other ways. So can you just give us a kind of a brief history of personhood as well as why is this something we need to be talking about?
Yes. There's a German philosopher, recently deceased, Spemann is his last name, who says a person is the difference between something and someone. There's a lot of things in the world, but then there are some entities in the world that we encounter where you're not a something, you're a someone. And what that is personhood. And in the book, I define a person. One way to think about it is as a heart, soul, mind, strength complex designed for love. To be a person is to be this beautiful, mysterious combination of these four things that Jesus adapts, you could say, from the Hebrew Shema, the Deuteronomy command to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. And Jesus adds mind for some reason. So heart, soul, mind, and strength. Designed for love. That's what we are. But the recognition that applies to every other human being is a very fragile and recent idea. That is to say, there have been long stretches of the human story in different parts of the world where human beings who are in fact persons, every single one, were not all in fact treated as persons. And it's really interesting to me that the Christian movement begins in a world where somewhere between 20 and 35% of the empire, the Roman Empire, are treated under law. There's literally two major categories of Roman law: the law of persons and the law of stuff. It's this Latin word res, which means thing, or I think stuff is a good. And slaves, the enslaved, were treated as stuff for the purposes of the law. And so you would walk through a Roman city and, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 of the people you met, of the other human beings who crossed your path, you would have no obligation if you were kind of a free man, no obligation to regard them as anything but stuff in the first century of the Common Era. And it's not that, of course, the Romans weren't aware that they were human, but there was this like systematic denial that they were persons. And then we have this interesting echo of this in our own history in the United States with this very complicated issue of the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, which apportions taxes and voting power and so forth according to the 3/5 of the number of enslaved persons. Now, the interesting thing about the Constitution is it actually does very specifically say they are persons. Mm-hmm. It doesn't depersonalize. And I think that's because the North won that side of the battle to recognize the personhood of those enslaved at the time of the American founding. But the South won the part of the battle that did not want to fully apportion them.
Right.
And, actually, sorry, I misspoke. It's actually more complicated. The Constitution limits how much they can be counted for the purposes of voting. And that's actually a loss for the South as well, because since they're only apportioned as 3/5, it reduces the voting power of the Southern states. So the Northerners gave personhood in the text of the Constitution, but took away 2/5 of it in order to maintain a certain amount of political dominance. Mm-hmm. So the North, as so often as a Northerner, I'm like, oh, those Southerners, they're so bad. But then I like go back and look more carefully at the history. I realize, oh, actually the North.
Right. The North stood to gain as well. Yeah.
So anyway, so this is just a recurring theme in history. Like who really counts for us as a person is a really big deal. And, arguably only intermittently under the influence of this astonishing social movement that began in the first century, that ultimately was called the Christian movement, have we sort of stretched towards or reached towards this reality that in fact every human being is a person. But that's not how it feels all the time, and not how it really is all the time.
Yeah, and I think for me, as the mother of a child with Down syndrome and being more involved in disability areas than I would have probably ever been otherwise, that sense of who is a person in the womb and even out of the womb, yes. Just knowing that there are ethicists who would argue that personhood is linked to cognitive ability in particular. I think there are other ethicists who would say that personhood is linked to lack of suffering in some way. When we start to think about whether it's the right to die on a euthanasia line, right. Or right. The right for a parent to withhold, life-saving measures for an infant, that sometimes might have to do with intellectual capacity. At other times might have to do with a perceived understanding that you are a person if you are free not to suffer in some way.
Yes.
And in both cases, I think the ways we are reducing personhood rather than saying this is an expansive understanding. And that's part of why I love your definition in terms of the heart, soul, mind, strength, complex, designed for love. And also I would say like designed by love for love, right? Yes. Like that there's there's a relationship that it's generative, and bestowed, right? It's not, it is intrinsic to every person.
It's not just a property.
Yes. Right.
Totally. Yeah. And bestowed by a creator, and also mutual, like, designed for love. I think, yes, designed to love others, but also designed to be loved. So yes. Some people have limited capability. I start the book early on. I talk about the son of friends of mine. He's clearly, it's early in his life, so it's hard to diagnose these things, but some version of autism, and not able for years to recognize at all his parents as, beings that he would want to gaze at. They, never made eye contact, never indicated kind of special awareness of their presence, which of course is incredibly painful, but that doesn't change the fact that he's loved and designed to be loved. Mm-hmm. And, every night we fall asleep and our cognitive capacities are gone. Mm-hmm. But really we only safely fall asleep in a place where we're loved. Yeah. And so we all need to be in this circle of mutual regard, recognition, care that in which our ability to extend it waxes and wanes, with the circumstances of life. But no matter how limited, young, old, whatever a person may be, they're designed to be part of that web of love, I think.
I agree, and I appreciate that distinction, kind of nuance, that there's a giving and receiving there. And this is skipping ahead in the book a little bit, but I think it's relevant to this aspect of the conversation, because you've hinted at this, that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus changes our understanding of personhood. And you have a story that's woven through this book that has a lot to do with very modern technology and superpowers and airplanes and phones and all these things. Woven through all of that is a conversation about Gaius and Tertius and the names in the New Testament that I tend to, glaze over and not pay any attention to. But I would love for you to talk about how Jesus changes things, and actually tell us the story of Gaius and Tertius and how that speaks to this.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I'm attempting in this book, and one is to say, as new as our problems are in some ways, they're not fundamentally new, and as whatever hope there is that we can somehow navigate through this technological world, which I do see as very damaging in some ways to human beings, the hope actually is not so much inherent in us, but inherent in a larger story that has been going for a long time, and that originated in this, in its own way, equally stratified, unjust, messy, also in its time technological empire. I mean, the Roman Empire had a degree of channeled power, financially, militarily, engineering power, that was just unparalleled in its time and its place. So there's a group of people who lived a really different way right in the midst of this. I mean, as this empire is just like going great, it's the Pax Romana, it's the triumph of Augustus Caesar and the establishment of the empire under a single figure, the emperor. And part of what I'm actually trying to do in this book, it's not that I don't believe in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. I believe in that very much, but I actually don't talk about that very much in the book. I'm kind of looking at I don't want to say the shadow cast by it. It's like the light cast by it. I'm looking at this sociological manifestation of something that happened such that, and this is getting to your invitation to tell this little piece of the story, such that we glimpse in Romans 16, as it happens to be, in this chapter that is mostly passed over by preachers and readers because it seems like it's just a list of hellos, all these people Paul wants to greet, and we don't really know much about most of them. And so really, what are you going to get from reading it? Right. Well, as I spent some time with it, I became more and more astonished, particularly at where this letter is being written. And we can put together that they're in the home of a man named Gaius. He owns a house, so he's a paterfamilias. He is a person. When he steps on the street, people pay attention. People know who he's connected to, who's connected to him. He's part of a web of relationship and patronage in the Roman world. Erastus is there. He's the city treasurer, and that's not very surprising. Like, of course, paterfamilias or patres familiae and city treasurers hang out and, have dinner together. But then we find out there's this other person there who's actually writing down the letter. We know that from the text. And his name is Tertius. And this is a total surprise because, the scribes slaves were present all the time in Roman households. In fact, in ways that would seem really weird to us. Like, they were present to every single thing you did in a household, including in the bedroom, which is just crazy. So, of course, there's a slave there, probably a slave, certainly a scribe, taking notes for this letter. But it turns out he's a guest in the home. He's not just an employee. And in fact, he's a brother. He's seen as a brother by Gaius. He's Gaius's brother. And Tertius's name in Latin is just the word for number 3. It means third. So basically, the Romans only named their firstborn son because that's where all the family line would go. And then by the third son, or a baby born maybe in the 3rd month of the year, the Roman year, if it's not the firstborn, they're like, we'll call this one number 3. And then he actually says, Tertius is writing, he's like, Gaius, who's host to me, greets you. Erastus, the state treasurer, greets you. I say hello, and so does the brother Quartus, which means number 4. So you have on the one hand, Gaius and Erastus, who are men of prominence. Then you have Tertius and Quartus, whose names literally mean number 3 and number 4.
Yeah.
And then we know who's going to pick up the letter that Tertius writes and carry it herself to Rome, because she's the first one named in Romans 16, and her name is Phoebe. And all of them are sitting around this table. Now, anyone, the Romans didn't have glass, in their windows. So you would walk by people's houses and you could look in, and I suppose they might have had curtains and that sort of thing, but you could hear what was going on. And if anyone had looked in or heard, Gaius referring to Tertius as his brother, they would have been probably horrified. Like, that is a violation of social status. You do not talk about these stratified relationships this way. And then if they'd realized that Phoebe was the one who was going to take the letter and interpret it to the Romans, because when you carried a letter, it was your job not just to sort of hand it over, but read it aloud and probably give commentary, explain it, answer questions, right? Yeah. And she's the one entrusted with this, and she's their sister. Like, this just scrambles. And then, of course, we have the fact that there's this guy named Paul, who used to be called Saul, who, as a Jew, would never have been in this house until something happened. So in the book, I don't really get into like what happened. I mean, it's clear something really crazy happened to within 30 years, because this is probably happening in the 60s at the latest. Within 30 years of the life of Jesus, the end of the historical end of the life of Jesus, you've got this just mad thing happening in which all these people, some of whom have can't even give testimony in a court of law, can be treated as property. They are all seeing one another as members of one family. It's amazing.
Well, and one of the things you do in not just telling that story, but also tracing out those consequences when it comes to seeing human life differently and valuing going after the infants who have been left out to die. I mean,
exactly.
And truly, exactly. This was just an article I was reading in a magazine today, but like even the idea of visiting people in prison and bringing sustenance, like Paul, this sense of the people who typically are discarded, whether that's by law or just by social practice, becoming ones who are honored and who are very much seen as those who bear the image of God. And there are lots of implications. And we, on the one hand, have inherited a lot of those implications, not only as actual Christians, but even just living in the West. But on the other hand, they can become, we might not have to think them through in quite the same way because we've inherited them. And I think that's part of what you're trying to do in this book, is to say, well, wait, what do we really mean? Like, it really might mean, as inconvenient as it is, that you question your purchase from Amazon, right? Or, and which, as an Amazon Prime member myself, I am loath to do. And yet I need to be doing that. I really do. And I guess so I want to move us to the conversation about superpowers, and magic. And just, I want to seed this thought, this stream of conversation with this quotation from your book. So you write, "You cannot take advantage of a superpower and fully remain a person." And so we need to define superpower. You write about, for example, like a bicycle being not a superpower, but an airplane being a superpower. So maybe that's an example to use. But then why? So what is a superpower, and why can you not take advantage of it and fully remain a person?
Yes. So I suppose I would say a superpower is a greatly increased power with greatly decreased effort. Mm-hmm. It's both much expanded capabilities and kind of amazing ease or simplicity. So, because, when Superman, who sort of the original superhero, sets out to fly, he doesn't have to be like, okay, got to start beating my arms really fast or, reach takeoff speed or something.
Yeah.
Like he just decides to fly, right? And so superpowers, I think, carry this connotation of it's just effortless, extraordinary ability. And this is what technology often is sold as promising us, and often literally with the word, because I've been seeing this word everywhere in the last few years in kind of tech marketing. It's a very favored kind of language of Silicon Valley in particular. But I do believe, and I actually, Amy, I do believe that sentence you read, that you cannot take advantage of a superpower without leaving some part of your personhood behind. I don't know how to prove it, except that I have never seen a superpower that keeps you fully engaged, heart, soul, mind, strength, with love in the world. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it's for two reasons. One is effortlessness does not develop me in any way. So the more time I spend in the book, I call it the superpower zone, where I'm like, whether it's pounding through email or flying from place to place, albeit with the help of an airplane, not like Superman, but still like I'm not exerting any more effort than Clark Kent does, right? I'm just sitting there and I'm flying. I wished to fly, I paid to fly, and now I'm flying. That's a superpower as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
All of these attenuate certain fundamental parts of being human. So even when I'm feeling super productive, I'm like answering email really fast. There's actually an email interface called Superhuman. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's the really hot thing. A bunch of my coworkers love it because it allows you basically to get through email really fast by pretending. It sort of inserts this layer of processing that makes your responses much quicker, and yet makes it seem like you're actually paying attention to people while you do it. That's maybe a little unfair. It's a nice set of tools. I have no objection to it per se, but even while I feel like, I'm being very effective, I'm answering Amy Julia's email, I'm answering this other person's email, I'm getting it done so fast, and you feel this kind of, you're in the zone, you're making a lot of progress. Your body is totally inert.
Right.
Like, and this is the whole thing about computational superpowers, is they pay basically no attention to our need to move as human bodies.
Yeah.
And to develop our strength. And so they're not developmental. They often leave one or more parts of heart, soul, mind, strength completely at the door, like just not engaged. And I also think it's very rare I don't think they ever lead us more deeply into love. I think the whole point of superpowers is to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And getting stuff done is sort of, at best, orthogonal, like just totally unrelated to loving the persons that I'm given to love. Because to love is not to get any particular thing done per se, I don't think, with a person. At least not in the sense of that attention, that care, that is the primary duty of love. I suppose when you make dinner for your family or you clean up the dishes, you are loving your family, and there can be productivity there. But so the superpowers that we're given by the technological world are amazing, but they're not amazing at developing us as persons. They're just amazing at getting stuff done, which is not bad, but it's not the main task of human beings. What's the first commandment? Get a great deal done in the world. No, it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And superpowers just don't help with that at all.
Well, and we do see, in terms of thinking about humans as being designed for love, I think we see a great human toll from our superpowers. Whether that's like literally just obesity or heart disease or, some sort of like physical effects. But I think also in terms of our bent towards productivity instead of relationship, measuring ourselves and others in those terms, rather than understanding ourselves as those who are given to and from and for love.
Wow.
So I think, we get a lot done and we are not the better for it. And I think even the data, backs that assertion up.
Completely. And, I was just before we started talking, I was reading the section in your book, your latest book, about Mark. Oh, I forgot the chapter. The healing of the woman who's been
Mark
bleeding
5.
for 12 years. Mark 5. And, think about this. Now, Jesus, like, we would think a superpower is the ability to just heal people, like, instantly. That sounds like a superpower.
Seriously.
So, but think about that chapter. So first of all, for the context, as you so beautifully, it's one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible, as you beautifully described, the context is he's been asked by this synagogue leader named Jairus to come heal his daughter. Now, if Jesus has superpowers, why can't he just do it? He actually does in other places. Like there's a centurion who comes to him and is like, you don't even need to come to my house.
Yep.
And so Jesus is already doing this very inefficient thing of walking to Jairus's house very slowly because there's a large crowd.
Yep.
Like surely he should be like Superman and be like, excuse me while I fly over the crowd, get to the house if necessary, but really just act at a distance. Like we know you can do it, Jesus. But then it's compounded, right, by this woman who comes up behind him in the crowd, touches his cloak. There is this kind of quasi-magical, cessation of her illness. And Jesus is specifically not willing to just let the magic happen, right? He's like, who touched me? And I think this indicates to us that Jesus, though indeed he is presented to us in the Gospels as having extraordinary abilities that we ordinarily don't know how to access, that were available to him because of his intimacy with his Father, he would have said. And I think that's the heart of the matter. Even then, with all that extraordinary ability, his priority remains presence to persons, presence to the daughter who's in front of him, presence to the daughter whose home he's going to, presence to Jairus, presence to Peter and James and John, who he invites in to be part of that. And all of that is highly unproductive, but highly germane to his real mission, which in the end is not just the cessation of a few illnesses or even the recovery of a life, but the recovery of love in the world. But it's hard for us to stay in that. When we get these abilities, we're like, well, now I can get a lot done, but I don't have time for people. Right.
Right. And I think there's one of the things I was talking with somebody else earlier today about is that healing is not like a transaction Jesus' healing is not transactional, it's relational.
Exactly.
And I think that's related here to superpowers
completely.
Allow more transactions and less relationships. Like there's some sort of, I don't know, you could create some good, quadrant something on that, but you're very good with those.
No, totally. Because our superpowers are not, in fact, based on profound personal intimacy with the creator of the universe. So Jesus never, I don't think Jesus one moment in his life conceived of the idea of impersonal power, unless it was when he was being tempted he's portrayed as being tempted to do magic, which is impersonal power. And he says, I'm not going to live that way. That's not how a faithful human being lives. But the rest of us, and especially we technological people, the way we get stuff done really fast is not by being more and more personally engaged with God and with others. We get it done through money, basically, because you don't get any of this technology unless you're part of the money economy. Right. It's not just handed out for free. And so you pay for it, and money is like the ultimate magic in a way, because by turning relationships into transactions, it makes them highly efficient. Because when I go to the corner store to get something, I no longer need to stop and ask about that person's parents and how they're doing. They don't know who I am. I don't know who they are. I mean, these days, you don't even make eye contact. Like you swipe your card over the reader and the stuff is handed to you and there's a perfunctory thank you, that they were scripted. And then they say, it's my pleasure, which they were all taught to do. And you're off. And money is what gives us superpowers, and money turns every relationship into a transaction. Whereas Jesus and his followers, when Simon the magician, I think it is, who comes to Paul, he's like, hey, can I pay you to be part of this? He's like, you so do not get it. Like that's a demonic instinct to think that you could buy your way in to this kind of power in the world. But we believe, far more than we probably like to admit, that real power doesn't require persons and definitely doesn't require love.
And yet, I think we also probably believe more than we would like to admit, or like no one would say, I care more about money and getting things done than I do about love. In fact, I think many people would argue, no, technology properly used allows us to have all sorts of great things for all sorts of people. Like we can get, one laptop per child, or, it's enabling education. It's enabling, medication. I mean, let's talk about medicine for a minute. I was thinking about this. You give this beautiful example. I'll let you tell the story of the epilepsy. There's a story in the book about a detector of seizures. Will you tell that story? Right. So so will you tell about that? But also let's talk about technology. How is it possible for it to be in the service of love and human flourishing? When does that happen? What are those conditions kind of?
Great question. And very important, because I absolutely believe there are places, I believe technology, we all know, it emerges from science, which is the patient disciplined study of the natural world. I believe the natural world is a created world. I believe it's good. So anything that we truly discover about the world must be part of the goodness, or indeed very goodness, that's available to us as God's image bearers. So I am all for using that. And when it's used in relational context, I think it can be very, very beneficial, especially when it's used to relieve toil. I think there's a place for that. And there are some kinds of toil that I think we are glad to be done with. My grandmother would have spent, I'm sure, a day or two a week simply washing laundry. And now we spend a few hours a week washing laundry. And I don't see that as a great diminution. I see that as a expansion of room for all kinds of other image bearing activities, though there's nothing wrong with doing laundry or undignified about it, but it's nice to have technological help. And with medicine, I think it's complicated. And I want to talk about that epilepsy intervention, because I think it's another way that we haven't pursued as much as we should have done. So the thing is, we live in this little slice of human history that's going to be remembered as the antibiotic era, where we found a class of drugs that for a certain amount of time with certain pathogens were extreme. They were like magic. Like you take that pill, like with certain kinds of infections, even just your first dose, within a couple hours, you feel like magically better. Yeah. And then the big problem is people don't keep taking the doses because they feel better already. And then we actually get the thing that's going to cause us to exit the antibiotic era, which is multiple drug resistance and bacteria that will ultimately make end runs around all of our antibiotics. But we live in this little sliver of time where there were pills you could take that operated like a magic button for certain ailments. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful discovery, saved countless lives, probably saved my own life. I'm probably here because of that. I do think probably our great grandchildren will benefit much less from those drugs, because the bugs that will attack them will be smarter for lots of reasons. And the big problem is that has fooled us as a society into thinking that's what medicine should always be like. In other words, there should be a fix. There's I've got a problem, doc, what's the fix? And the set of problems to which the doctor can provide a fix, Ronald Heifetz calls these type 1 problems, where it's a known problem, known solution, and all that's needed is the expertise of the provider, and the patient doesn't have to know anything. Like, here, just take this pill. Don't worry about what's in it. I can't explain it to you. Just take it 2 times a day for 7 days. Turns out type 1 problems are a very, very small subset of human ailments. Yeah. Even orthopedic surgery, which in one way, like a simple thing like a broken bone, gosh, I'm so glad there are people who know how to set bones and it's such that they heal. But even that surgery is a complicated intervention into a human being's life that is by no means simply, we'll cut this open, we'll, unbreak this thing and put it back together. You need so many other things around you, not least effective antibiotics, by the way, for that to be possible. And medicine, in fact, the securing of health and healing for human beings is this intensely social, personal, relational thing, sorry, I feel like I'm going on a little long here,
No,
it's it's so complicated.
Yes.
Because another thing that's really complicated is the placebo effect,
Right.
which is this crazy reality that when people believe they will be made well, they are made well, even when we can't see any intervention.
I almost interrupted you to say with orthopedic surgeons, and I don't think this is true with broken bones, but many back surgeries especially, but knee surgeries as well, like you don't necessarily need the surgery. You need to believe that you've gotten help.
Which it can only be mediated ultimately through the trust in that provider, that surgeon or physician who says, I can tell you this is going to help. And we believe that. And even if they, in a study setting, they covertly do not intervene, the trust in that activates something in our soul, mind, strength system to believe that we can be made well. And we are.
Right.
So it's actually so much about trust. And the effects that actually are mediated by medicine that are these sort of magical, knockout effects are such a small part of what health is. But the problem is that's become the whole metaphor, the guiding metaphor, in ways that are very misleading for both physicians or healthcare providers and patients, and lead us to expect our healthcare system to do crazy things that it cannot do, to restore things in ways that can't be restored in the way we might hope, that cause us to miss out on the relational dynamic of provider and patient. So there's this whole system being introduced everywhere in the world now that does nothing, demonstrably nothing, to serve the interaction between provider and patient. The thing it does is make it possible to make it a transaction. And It's called EMR, electronic medical records. And when you go into a typical Western healthcare appointment, especially in the US, it's not quite as bad in single payer countries, though they have their own issues. But you go in and 90% of the time, the nurse or the doctor, whoever's providing your care, is looking at a screen rather than you, doesn't have the time to establish trust because it all has to be billed. And this is doing incredible damage to health. So we need a different model of where healing comes from that acknowledges all the amazing things we've learned about the human heart, soul, mind, strength system and the interventions that truly can help. And that gets to this thing I read about, which I'll describe really briefly, which is this really interesting thing called sudden death from epilepsy, which happens when a person has such a deep seizure that it shuts down the fundamental ability of the brain to keep the bodily systems going.
Yeah.
But there's this window of time where if you could detect it, people can be brought out of these deep seizures, but almost always only through another person being with them at that moment, touching them, and ideally calling them by name. And my friend, I'm very honored to call her my friend. I've learned so much from her, kind of a mentor in all this, Roz Picard at MIT. She and her team developed this it's like a little smartwatch type bracelet that can detect the onset of this, I don't know if it's technically a grand mal seizure, but very, very profound seizure. And then all the little thing can do is alert a person, a nearby person. So you say, hey, here's the cell phone of my neighbor, because don't give it your mom's cell phone if she lives 100 miles away. She can't help. Give it your neighbor's cell phone, the person closest to you who could get to you in time and could touch you gently on the shoulder and say, Amy Julia. And that gets through the brain's kind of seizure and penetrates to the point where that person awakens and comes back, but only through the presence of a person.
And not just,
I was
so
device.
Struck by that example in your book because it's the presence of a nearby person, the touch, and the name. And just in terms of that sense of like personhood being what is both so intrinsic to who we are, as well as so intrinsic to our understanding of healing. And much as we, and again, and it's such a beautiful example of technology that actually is enabling that instead of trying to short circuit or ignore that reality. So I thank you. And thank you for your thoughts, not just for that example, but for those thoughts, because I do think for all of us who are, certainly kind of embedded within this, biomedical system, which has created many, many things. As you said, I'm sure antibiotics have saved my life, and there are many things I'm incredibly grateful for. And yet also, I think one of the things I so want is for us to have medicine and technology in its proper place, because I do think I guess you at the beginning were just saying that technology is the idol of our age, and so what that does is it makes it supreme. It makes it that which we worship, that which everything is oriented towards, and it's when we start getting it in that distorted place that I think all of these other residual problems flow out, right?
Exactly.
Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time already, and nobody else knows this, but I was late to our interview here, and you were very patient with me, so I'm only going to ask you one more question.
Doesn't matter.
But I did want to know, how have you structured your own life as a person in order to better reflect these truths about what it means to be a heart, soul, mind, strength complex designed for love? What are some things that you either attempt to do or regularly practice now, or what, in terms of being a person?
Yeah.
And recognizing others as persons.
Yeah. So I would say, I'll give you maybe 2 or 3 things that I've tried to do more and more intentionally. The biggest change I've made in my life in the last 5 or 10 years, it's kind of absurd how big of a deal it has been for my health, not just my physical health at all, my spiritual, like my health as a person, because it's such a small thing, is simply, quite a while ago, we stopped having phones in our bedroom, so all the phones are downstairs. But I would go downstairs in the morning and immediately pick up my phone. So the change I made 5 or 6 years ago was to leave the phone plugged in, not look at it. I make a cup of tea almost every morning. But the first thing I do really is I go out of doors, outside, and I walk out into creation. And I am just this small little person, and the moon is whatever phase the moon is. One of the really interesting side effects is I now know what phase the moon is most of the time, which there was probably 20 years where I had no idea. Yeah. And you hear it's spring as we record this. And this morning I was out at 5 a.m. I was up quite early, and I heard the first birds singing, and it was cloudy, kind of heavy clouds, and I felt the weight of the humidity in the air. And every day I walk outside, and there's this world going on that isn't about me. And instead of picking up this device that is exquisitely tailored to me, like says you're the center, like to that device, I'm the center of the world. It wants me to see myself that way. And it's just been... it has really almost single-handedly freed me from the sense of dependence, or sometimes we say addiction, to my phone. Like, because I come back in to the day and the screens, because I work a lot with screens, and I just feel in the right place. So that's been huge. Yeah. So then a more relational thing. Well, one of the things that I learned to do years ago that I've kept up is I try really intentionally to learn people's names wherever I am. So I'm a public figure of a certain kind. I just got back from 9 days in the Bay Area in California. I did 15 public events. Some of them were really big, and big audiences, no way to learn anyone's name per se. But many of them were medium-sized groups, 8 people, 15 people, 30 people. And up to about 30 people, I really try not to be in a room without learning every name. And that sounds really hard, and it is. It requires a lot of attention. It requires like really intense focus. It's actually quite tiring to have people go around and say their name, say something about themselves, and actually remember. But the good news is if you practice it, which I've now practiced, I started doing this when I was about 20 years old. And so I've got 30 years of practice. It becomes easier. Like I can learn 30 names really without conscious effort. I just have to tell myself I'm paying attention now. And then I go around the room. I'm like, let me just make sure I got it. And I'm also totally willing to fail. If I forget someone's name, I'm just willing to say, I forgot. And it freaks people out because they're like, they've never met anyone who actually was listening when they said their name. You know, you sort of think, yeah, my name's Andy. I'm from Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. Like it's so perfunctory because you assume other people aren't thinking, which is usually the case. But for me, it's this practice because the reality is in those rooms, people do know my name. I've been introduced. I'm the special guest,
right.
Even if I'm just the guest from out of town, you know. And it's just so important to me whenever I can to look at someone's face and match that to a name and let them know that I paid attention enough at least to know their name. And that also has been, it's just been a very, very helpful discipline in this weird life I have as a, you know, public speaker and influential, whatever I am.
Yes.
So those are two.
I love that. I think those are both
things.
really beautiful and simple and helpful.
Yeah.
And yet also as someone who I am not I'm not there yet on the walking outside in the morning, but and it's amazing to me how much I still resist that not going to my phone first thing. I go through these cycles where I leave it downstairs and I can experience like exactly what you're describing. And then for whatever reason, I needed to respond to this person, or I needed to check this thing for school for Penny, or whatever it is. But it's not just that on that one day, I kind of violate my practice. That is what sets me back into the, like, you know, it really wasn't that bad. I'll do that again, you know? So anyway, I deeply appreciate and need those. The names, I think, is also, I mean, it just goes back to even what we were saying about the embrace, epilepsy technology as far as it is really meaningful to people to be named and to be known by name. And so I think that does, yes, on some level, it's like a party trick and you're, learning to pay attention and you've gotten good at it. But on another level, it's saying I have chosen to pay attention in this way, which goes back to something we were saying earlier in terms of that relationship between attention and love and personhood. And so I do think when we start to be willing to pay attention, it enables us to also bring, and I don't mean you deeply love every one of those 29 people around the table. And yet there is a sense of like, I'm bringing myself as a person who is equipped to love and able to love. That's who I'm bringing here today. And I'm hoping you're doing the same, right? So I think that's really beautiful. Well, there is much, much more that we could discuss. I actually have questions we haven't even gotten to, but I'm going to leave that as a teaser for everyone who's listening to this and should pick up this new book, The Life We're Looking For by Andy Crouch. And we'll leave all sorts of, notes in the show notes for people who want to click on links and use technology to, exert superpowers and have a book on your doorstep tomorrow. But I do think this is one that can generate. We didn't even talk about households, for example. I'm just going to seed that as a teaser for something that's also really important in this book. And there's much more, but I really appreciate your words and your thinking and many years of writing and speaking and thinking that you've been willing to offer with all of us, myself included. So thanks for being here.
Oh, man. Well, truly a gift. Thank you, Amy Julia.
Thanks, as always, for listening to this episode of Love is Stronger Than Fear. I really recommend this book, The Life We're Looking For. And I will also give a plug here for Andy's other books. And that goes all the way back to his first book, Culture Making, which came out in 2008. My personal favorite is actually a small book that Andy wrote called Strong and Weak. Peter and I refer to it frequently as we think about our own role as agents in the world. And we also love The Tech-Wise Family and Andy's other book, Playing God. I will also recommend Andy's podcast, which he hosts for Praxis. It's got great conversations about creative entrepreneurship. The show notes will give you all sorts of ways to hear or read more from Andy Crouch. I'm also really grateful to Jake Hansen for editing this podcast, for Amber Beery, my social media coordinator. She does so much to support me and to support this show. And I'm really grateful that you're here. So as you go into your day today, I hope you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.